As we mentioned before, today is the start of Advent. And during this year's Advent season, we are going to look at the Christmas story. In particular, the Christmas story as told by the Gospel of Luke. And as we meet the various characters in the Christmas story, we're going to ask them this question: what is the meaning of Christmas? The first characters we meet in Luke's telling of the Christmas story are Zechariah and Elizabeth, a couple who live in the countryside of Palestine. Zechariah is a small-town priest, and his wife, Elizabeth, is a priest's daughter. She comes from a faithful, respected family, and she and her husband are a faithful and righteous couple. They are the kind of couple that you hold up as a role model to the town's youth. Yet this role model couple carries a heavy burden. They have no children, at a time when that was the expectation for all couples. It was years ago that they were married, and if we had been there, here's what we might have seen. At their wedding, friends and family offer blessings, toasts and blessings for many, many children. Guesses are made as to how many kids they will have. Friends tell Zechariah what a great dad he will be. They're excited to start a family. 1 year goes by, no children. 2 years, no children. 5 years, no children. By this point, family members and neighbors in town start to they start talking a little bit. At this time, to be childless was considered a punishment by God. The people mumble, God must be judging them for some sin in their life. If a couple could not conceive, it was assumed to be the wife's fault. And Jewish teachers encouraged husbands to divorce their childless wives so that they could continue their family line. Zechariah hears the comments and the advice, and he ignores them. He stays with Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, with each passing year, feels more shame and more disappointment. You know, as we start this Advent season, and as we begin looking at the Christmas story, I think it's really significant to note that the first characters we meet in this story are characters that have experienced deep disappointment. The real Christmas story doesn't take place in a winter wonderland where everything is merry and bright. The real Christmas story takes place in the real world where there is sadness and disappointment. We light the Advent candle because Christmas comes to those living in a land of darkness. We sing joy to the world because Christmas comes to those who understand what it means to be sad. One day I was listening to a preacher on the radio, and this preacher said, God will never disappoint you. And I heard this and thought, what planet do you live on? I mean, I understood his point, but seriously, Scripture is full of people like Zechariah and Elizabeth who have been disappointed. Many of the prayers in the Bible are prayers of disappointment. God, where are you? God, do you see what's going on? Do you care? Do you even hear me? After the death of his wife, C.S. Lewis wrote, "Where is God? Go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face and a sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. After that, silence." Christmas takes place in the kind of silence and disappointment that C.S. Lewis is describing. And after 20, 30, 40 years of this silence, Zechariah and Elizabeth have little reason to hope Maybe they've come to terms with reality. Maybe Elizabeth has accepted the fact that she will never have kids. Zechariah is now in his 60s. And after serving as a priest for all of these years, he gets the opportunity of a lifetime. The priests are divided up into 24 divisions or groups. There are thousands of priests, but only one temple. So each division is only on duty twice a year for 1 week at a time. And since there are so many priests, they cast lots to see who gets to do what. Now, offering incense in the temple is the greatest duty. It was such a privilege that a priest could only do it once in a lifetime. Some priests never got the opportunity. For a priest, it's the highlight of your career. The afternoon incense is offered at 3 p.m., which is a special time of prayer. And so crowds gather in the courtyard and pray while the priest goes into the priestly sanctuary and offers this incense. So Zechariah is fulfilling the priestly task of a lifetime when out of nowhere an angel appears. And the angel tells Zechariah, "Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear a son." Zechariah can't believe it. He wants a sign because in his eyes, he's too old and his wife is too old. Now, it's kind of comical, right? But the angel seems downright offended by Zechariah's response. I picture the angel turning to Zechariah and saying, "Oh, no, you didn't. Did you just question me? Do you know who I am? I am not your run-of-the-mill angel. I am Gabriel. Ring a bell. You want a sign? You got one. No talking for 9 months." Boom, right? He's just like, take that. Now, some of you are thinking, no talking for 9 months. That would be unbearable. Others of you are thinking, can I hire Gabriel to do that for someone I know? No talking for 9 months. That is what happens to Zechariah. Now, while they're having this interaction, the crowd in the temple courtyard is starting to get antsy because the priest has to come out, give a benediction before everyone can come home. So they're wondering, where is he? What's taking so long? Finally, he comes out, but instead of giving a benediction, he starts playing charades. It's kind of comical once again. The text tells us that he tries he tries without speaking to tell them what's going on. I picture him, 1 word, 2 syllables, angel. God heard my prayer. Right? He's just playing charades with them. Maybe they understand. Finally, he goes home. Even though he cannot speak to Elizabeth, he is able to communicate to her what happened and what the angel said. Picture what that time must have been like for the two of them. What an exciting time, and yet what a scary time. Proverbs 13:12 says that hope deferred makes the heart sick. Hope itself can be a curse. And by now, maybe Elizabeth has surrendered her hope. To believe this angel, to hope again, is to expose themselves to despair and disappointment one more time. I can imagine Elizabeth saying, I don't want to try again. Not another pregnancy test. I do not want to feel that pain again. They must answer the question, are we willing to hope? Are we willing to believe that disappointment doesn't have the last word? Are we willing to see barrenness as a season of promise? They are willing, and so they make love and they watch and they wait. And soon, the impossible happens. Elizabeth becomes pregnant, and she hides out for 5 months, till the baby's past those early stages, till she's starting to show. And then she proclaims, God has taken away my disgrace. If we were to ask Elizabeth and Zechariah, what does Christmas mean? I think they might say to us that God hears our prayers, that disappointment doesn't have the last word, hope does, that barrenness is the soil in which God plants his grace. Let me explain what I mean by that last point. We need to ask ourselves, why does God choose Zechariah and Elizabeth as the couple to conceive John the Baptist, who prepares the way for the Messiah? God chooses them because they are barren. God chooses them because in their situation, the element of human possibility has been totally removed. They are powerless and helpless. God shows his power when we are powerless. God comes to our help when we are helpless. His grace requires barrenness. It requires that we come to the end of our own rope, the end of our self-reliance, with nothing to bank on but God alone and God's grace. Barrenness is the soil in which God plants his grace. That's a pattern we see running throughout the scriptures. We see that with Zechariah and Elizabeth, and their story echoes the story of so many couples, including the story of Abraham and Sarah in Genesis. They were barren, and they were old. They were powerless and helpless. And precisely for this reason, God chose them to become the parents, the nation of Israel. By his grace, God does for us what we cannot do for ourselves in our barrenness. He works for us. He acts on our behalf. Now, at the same time, we have a role to play, a choice to make. We must choose to cooperate with his grace in order to receive the promise that lies fallow in the soil of barrenness. Barrenness is a powerful metaphor. We all endure barrenness of one kind at different points in our lives. We inevitably fail to conceive and give birth to our hopes and desires. We experience emptiness of some kind. What is your disappointment? Where is your barrenness? I know that question hits us all at different points. For some of us, maybe it makes us think back to a season in our lives, where a barren season that we experienced. Maybe for some of us, we realize, I'm in the midst of a barren season right now. I can really relate. You know, for me, it makes me think about all the changes that come with moving. Moving in one way is very exciting. I'm someone who likes new things. But there's another way that there's a certain barrenness that comes with moving because everything you've known is cleared out. There's a complete loss of that which is familiar, a loss of family, a loss of friends. And I know for Cindy and me, that's something we've experienced. This is our fourth church, so we've done this before. But it doesn't mean it gets easier as far as just the moving side of it. There's a way that when you move somewhere, especially somewhere you've never lived before, that's thousands of miles from where you've lived, you kind of just see this open landscape and you wonder, what's going to develop? What's going to grow here? What's going to be born? Several weeks ago, we had friends from LA that came and visited us, and we were talking about the transition. And one of them said to Cindy, "You keep prayer journals, right?" And she does. She's kept prayer journals ever since college. She's got this row of them, those college composition books, prayer journals for years and years and years. And our friend said, you should go and look back over those prayer journals when you were new in a place and just see what you were thinking, see what you were feeling, see what God was doing there. And Cindy said, that's a great idea. So she started reading back some of her old journals from previous moves. And she came to me one day and said, Tim, I got to share with you these journals. So we sat down together in our living room, and she just began reading journal entries. And the thing that was most striking about reading these journal entries was seeing how God answered the prayers we were praying at that stage in our life. She could go to specific churches and specific moves, and she would say, listen to this. I was praying for this, and I was praying for that, and I was praying for this. And we could see how, even though there was this barrenness at the beginning, because everything's new and unknown, and you've lost all that's familiar, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line, God specifically answered these prayers. It was so awesome to see. It was like Gabriel speaking to Zechariah. God has heard your prayers. And for us, reading through these prayer journals was a reminder that barrenness is a season of promise. The good news of Advent is that as we come to the end of our possibilities, God works his possibility. That's what he does for Zechariah and Elizabeth. In the end, disappointment does not have the last word. In the end, hope has its reasons, and hope has its day. In the end, God brings life out of barrenness. See, and that's true ultimately because Zechariah and Elizabeth didn't just conceive a child. They conceived a child who prepared the way for the Christ child. And it's his birth that we celebrate at Christmas. And it's his birth that promises us that disappointment does not have the last word. Jesus Christ brings life, life eternal and life abundant into our broken and barren world. That's why we make such a big deal about Christmas. This morning, we're going to receive communion. And as we prepare our hearts for communion, and as you receive communion, I want to invite you to reflect on this question. Is there an area in my life where I'm feeling barren? An area in my life where I've given up hope? I think it's important to name it, to identify that area and to name it before God. And God asks us today what he asked Zechariah and Elizabeth 2,000 years ago. Are you willing to hope again? Are you willing to believe that disappointment does not have the last word? Are you willing to see barrenness as a season of promise?